Hello, my name's Lachlan and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about working as a scare actor. If you haven't seen the first part of this video, I'd recommend checking that one out before watching this one. Like I promised in the first part, this one will be all about Horror Night. Specifically the part of Horror Night where I was, called Run. Horror Night is when the park reopens at night with a few select attractions that are open then as well. Most importantly, the haunted houses. Run was a nighttime specific attraction which consisted of an outdoor haunted house of sorts, which the guests were supposed to be scared through by us actors. The instructions we got on our costumes beforehand was American slasher vibes, which isn't really my favorite type of horror, so I did have some issues coming up with a good costume in the beginning. My first draft was a headless horseman type of thing a la Scooby-Doo, which is where I saw the headless horseman for the first time and I was scared shitless. I was 6. Since I didn't have a horse available, and I don't think the park would have been happy with me borrowing an animal, I decided to instead revamp it into sort of a scarecrow figure, because I thought the look of the headless horseman would work fairly well for that as well. When I was looking for masks though, I found this Momo wannabe kind of thing, and in all honesty it gave me the heebie-jeebies. So, in other words, it was perfect. I mean, it wasn't a pumpkin, but what can you do? To personalize it a bit, I destroyed it with a heat gun and then I weathered it using normal acrylic paints. Since it's plastic, acrylic paints doesn't really stick to it, so I added a layer of glue on top to keep the paint in. The rest of my costume wasn't that remarkable. I tried to look as much as a prop as possible because my goal was for the guests to come up close to me before realizing that I was a person and then scaring them by moving and then running after them. I heavily distressed a shirt and a pair of pants I had lying around, and then I did the same to a hat that I bought secondhand. I used a variety of objects to distress them, and it was a really fun thing to do, since that's not something I've done when making costumes before. I also got a pair of knitting needles that I stuck to my arms to make it look like my arms were hung up like a scarecrow's. In a fit of madness, I also got a pack of hay to stuff my clothes with so that I looked as bumpy in places you aren't bumpy and like a stuffed haystack as possible. Then I packaged myself up with some string and some duct tape to make it look like I was just some bags of trash that someone had made into a human-shaped form. When it was time for my first Horror Night shift, I had already done quite a few day shifts, so I felt like I could do a pretty good job. I was also really excited to actually scare people and not just interact with them. And I was especially happy with the age restriction, which I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was either 16 or 18. So no children. So the layout of this part of the park was about 200 meters of paved road, with objects and props lying around on the sides of it that the guests were gonna run through, and then some of the objects were on the road so that they'd have to zigzag through some places and have to be mindful of where they were going to add to the scare factor. Since this happened at night, there was also strobe lights along the walks, and these were in different colors, and they were also directed towards the people so that they shone into your eyes when you came running. To, instead of light up, they made it harder to see. The items and props that were laying around the sides were also for us actors to hide behind and use to scare people, to make sounds or things like that. Some of the props also had motion-activated smoke machines, which was really effectful and really cool when you walked past them the first time. So to start Run, you walk in as a group into a container where the park personnel tells you about it and that you're supposed to run. And while you're in the container, there's a smoke machine, and there's also a sound file playing, which ends with run. And then there's smoke coming from the outside, the door opens, and you're supposed to run. As the time to go out in the park comes, we're about 17 people, which is a lot for this small of an area, but there needed to be as many people as possible to be able to scare the guests through and keep them running the whole time, which was the idea. So I've put on my costume, I've stuffed myself with hay, and I also got fake blood all over me. And we go out into the park, and let me tell you, I felt like the belle of the ball out there. Everyone was giving me compliments on my masks and saying how scary I looked and like really just being vocal about that they thought that my costume, my character was really cool, which was very, it was very cool to hear and also really humbling and really made me feel very good about myself. My costume, and mostly because of the mask, was one of the scariest there, and it also really fit with the props and the things that were laying around, so it really melded into the theme of it. So the first day is more of a trial day, and there's no actual guests, but the people coming through are park personnel. And we get to try out the different positions along this paved road, and yeah, just try to scare people and see how it flows. And that's when my confidence fell right down back again. I had no idea what to do. I felt so awkward and like I wasn't scary at all. This really reminded me of my first day in the Realm of the Dead, but I did recuperate a lot quicker this time. By the end of the about 1.5 hour we worked that day, I did feel pretty good again and like I was ready for the actual thing the next day. So the next day I get ready, I skip the hay because it was uncomfortable and unnecessary. I do put on a little bit more duct tape and try to make myself look a bit more like the corpses that were laying around as well. So when we do get out there, we are assigned a place to be, so no area is kept empty. I was placed in the almost absolute front, and the front is where you greet the people out in the queue and you're also scaring them in the very beginning of the actual run. And after about an hour and a half, it is time for my break, which I was so grateful for. I was sweating profusely, it was very warm. I was also very annoyed that I couldn't really run after people, considering my costume was made for, like, the initial scare is me looking like a scarecrow. So I have the mask in front of my face and the eye holes are very small, so I can't really see properly, and it's a paved road, but there's also height elevations and the road isn't exactly straight, and there's also stuff laying on the road. So I could at best jog after people. I also had the sticks out of my arms, which really impeded me running and using my arms for that, and I did at more than one occasion actually poke a guest with them. Anyway, it's my break, so I go in there and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? How do I fix this? How do I make myself able to actually scare people the best way I can? So I decide to put on the mask backwards. So the mask is over the back of my head, and I put on a very quick makeup because I have half an hour of a break. I remove the tape from my arms so that the sticks aren't taped to my arms, but that instead are poked through holes in my gloves. That way I can put them down and not poke guests with them, and they're not impeding me being able to run. So when I go out again, I instead turn so I'm standing with my back facing the opening, and I'm standing there like very stiff, holding a very like unnatural body position. And then when they are running and they can see me, I start to like move my arms in ways you're not supposed to if your face is here. And I think that was a really effective way of scaring people. And then, of course, when they've gone past me and I've acted very scary, I then run after them because I'm already facing the road. I don't have anything that hinders me from seeing where I'm running. And that was very effective, and that was also very fun. So after doing those changes, the rest of the night went really great. After a while, we started banging on the container while the people were in there to make it more scary, to actually get them hyped up and start running when they got out. So there was a lot of running back and forth because I had to get back to my place when the door opened, but it was a lot of fun. Running and screaming and scaring people felt really, it's hard to describe, but a very calming feeling. I felt very at ease and powerful almost, which was a really cool feeling that lasted into the day afterwards, which was a day I wasn't working. The following days I did struggle a bit with pain management, since I managed to mess up my knee while I was pushing myself a little bit too hard with the running. I was also placed at very many different spots, which forced me to come up with several different ways to scare people since that was very different depending on where on this pavement you were. One place had a big metal sheet that I could use to make noise with a lid from a trash can, and other places I had to use the strobe lights to make my silhouette appear and look scary, and so on. Of all the places I was assigned, I heavily preferred the very beginning. There, the guests had the most energy they would have and almost always ran, and they were also the most easily scared. So with every group that ran by, you got a bit more hyped up for the next one, and you could also see when the next group was coming, which you couldn't from all of the places. So instead of having to be ready to scare people at any time, you could take mini breaks and then continue. The groups were also still in the groups when they came in the beginning. If you were positioned further back, the people would come like one by one or two at a time instead of being a full group. Considering the scare factor compared to the Realm of the Dead, I could really amp it up with the scary stuff, which I was super excited about. Since I did have to switch places a lot, I couldn't always go with my scarecrow idea. In the very front, there was this huge saw that they really wanted someone to be holding, and I was at that place a couple of times, so then I had to sort of ditch the scarecrow thing and stand there with the saw instead, which worked fairly well as well. For a very limited time, I was also in the very back, and at that point I was between two people who had very specific positions and very specific scares, so I was more walking along the sides of the pavement, and then I was swinging the hand and the foot that I showed in the first video and just sort of running after people. I attempted and experimented a bit with walking backwards while wearing the mask on the back of my head as well, which sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. For the last few shifts I was placed in the middle, where I had two different roles. The first one was behind one of these large metal sheets with the trash can lid that I was banging against it. This was pretty effective, and it really scared some of the people if you timed it right, but it was kind of hard since you couldn't see the people coming, or they would see you, so you had to really listen and time it right. But since I wanted to actually scare people more, I continued and I ran after that person while scraping the metal lid against the pavement, which makes a horrific sound. So that really got them going, and some people who had started walking at that point, I got them running again. The other position I had in the middle was just sort of in this little wood area. The whole place was in the woods. There was like a couple trees and some lights, and nothing specific to scare people with, so I felt kind of lost in the beginning, and I tried just like walking out and like looking scary, doing the scarecrow thing, but that didn't work as well with the light there. After a while, I started experimenting with laying down, because I was thinking I could reach my hands up and like grab at, not touching them, but like grabbing at their legs and stuff. But they didn't see me, of course, because they were running and they were looking forward and they had the strobe lights in their eyes. So I was like, well, maybe if I kick my legs up, that will give an effect. And as I did, I was lying with my head closest to the pavement and in this slope. So I kicked my leg up, and it just kind of brought the rest of my body along with it. And I did a backwards somersault, ending up on my feet. I did not know I could do that. I did do gymnastics when I was a kid, so I am still fairly flexible, and I am able to stand on my hands and do somersaults fairly easily. But this was unexpected, and it was fantastic, and it really freaked people out. Since my clothes sort of melted into the background, they're like dark greens and browns and greys. Like I said, they didn't see me from the beginning if I was just lying down. So when I'm just somersaulting backwards up to stand and then walking past and by them, that really freaked people out because they were not expecting that, which was super cool. To top it all off though, with the last group of guests on the last day, one of my colleagues who had also been working in the front came over to me and said that he had been walking into the container and standing behind them just as the park personnel closed the door, and then just like giving them a really freaky experience inside of the container. And then he asked me if I wanted to do that. And of course I did. So as the park personnel had explained the rules and this group, they walked in, and I just like slipped in there, and it took a few moments before they noticed I was there, and they were getting freaked out, and then when they opened the container, they just ran. And I ran after them, and it was so cool. It was a very, very good ending for me. So, my favorite things about this experience. Obviously, the people who got really, really scared. There's something so powerful about someone looking straight into your face and screaming with fear and running for their life. Obviously, that's not something you experience a lot in life, but that's definitely one of the reasons I am going back to this sort of work again. Along the same lines, it was also getting to move on my body in ways that scared people. It made me feel really powerful, partly the backwards somersaults that I did not know I could do, and partly just running as fast as I can after people, which is not again, it's not stuff you do regularly. And it felt really cool to be, to know that I was able to do that. Apart from the scaring, it was also talking and sharing stories with my colleagues. When you're doing something this specific, you almost always already have something in common, and it's easy to strike up a conversation. And I feel like I really learned a lot, both about other people and myself, while listening to their stories and talking about my own. Just like with the Realm of the Dead, there were some not great parts. The very obvious first one was that my body started hurting. I was pushing myself way too hard the first few times because it was such a rush to scare people that my knee and my foot started hurting, and I had to really pace myself the last couple of shifts. I couldn't push myself as much as I did the first days, or I would have actually hurt myself more permanently. There were, of course, also people who didn't play along, and I'm talking specifically about the guests here. When you enter a haunted house or something like that, you sort of agree to the terms of the game. You agree to suspend your disbelief, and you are there to be scared. Some people do it though to prove that they're tough or something like that. Instead of participating, they actively do the other thing, like just start walking instead of running, which makes it impossible to scare them the way that we're supposed to, and sort of ruin the experience for both of us. Some of them were also trying to push back or were mocking us, which really isn't cool. There were also some problems with the smoke machines the couple of last days. It had to do with the weather, so it wasn't anyone's fault, but the smoke didn't dissipate, but just stayed on the ground, so that there was like a couple of meters thick smoke cloud in the beginning, so that when the guests got out of the container, they couldn't see anything. They couldn't see the actors, they couldn't see the road, so they couldn't run. And the ones who did ran into people. I didn't have anyone running into me, but I had them running very close to me. And also someone sort of ran into a tree that I was standing next to. So that was very unlucky. There was bad communication with what we were supposed to do at that point, because no one knew that that sort of thing could happen. There was also a lot of just standing around and waiting for guests to come, which was kind of boring, honestly. But again, that's sort of the thing you sign up for with this kind of job. All in all, the good things tremendously outweigh the bad ones. I had so much fun, and I really feel like I've grown as a person from this experience. If scare acting is something you think you'd like, you should definitely try it out. I talk a lot more about how to get this sort of job and the pros and cons in the first video, so definitely check that out if you haven't. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and follow my other social medias. They are right here. I will see you in the next video.